All right, thank you all for joining us today for today's Security IQ Event Activated Learning demo. My name is Camille Dupuis, and I'll be moderating today's webinar. Before we learn about the feature from Kristen and see a demo from our CEO Jack and Scott, our security engineer, I want to go over a couple of items real quick with you. As attendees, you're on listen-only mode. This means you are muted. However, we invite you to ask any questions using the control panel at any time. At the end of the webinar, we'll save some time to hear from our experts and get those questions answered for you. If time doesn't permit for all the questions, we will absolutely respond via email to any that we don't get to today in the live broadcast. Now I will pass it on to Kristen, who will get us started and teach us more about how event-activated learning works. On to you, Kristen.
Great, thanks Camille, and thanks everyone for joining us. I realize that not all of you joining the webcast today may be familiar with Security IQ, so very quickly, in a nutshell, Security IQ is a complete security awareness and anti-phishing training platform. So it has more than 500 training modules, 2,000 phishing templates, and ready-made learner assessments, essentially everything that you need to build a successful security awareness program and that cyber alert workforce that we're all looking to get to. With Security IQ, we actually blend 3 different security education models or methods to maximize your learner engagement and deepen content comprehension and retention. So at the foundation is traditional, what we would call administrator activated education. This is where a program manager selects the training modules that will be presented to users at defined intervals. And with SIQ or Security IQ, they can actually personalize training based on their learners' roles, maybe their departments, or even security aptitudes by simply syncing with Active Directory. The next level of education is what we call learner-activated education. A good example of this is when you have a learner who clicks on a simulated phishing email, for example. By doing that, the system actually responds by delivering an anti-phishing education or training module in that teachable moment. So again, that learner-initiated action is what prompts the training. And then lastly, and what we'll actually show you today, is what we call event-activated education. This is another form of just-in-time training, but rather than being activated by the learner initiating an activity, it's triggered by security events that your endpoint protection solution is detecting and blocking before they actually get to your end users. So to be more specific, Security IQ integrates with several leading endpoint protection software suites that are continuously detecting and blocking security events. We currently offer an enterprise or an EPP sync tool for Symantec, but we also support integration with several other endpoint protection solutions through our API, and you'll see several of those here on the right side of your screen. So I guess the big question and why we're here today is, why would you want to integrate your endpoint protection with your security awareness training? Well, it's very simple. We're all accustomed to on-demand services in everything we do. That goes for video on-demand streaming that we're watching, on-demand food delivery services that we use, on-demand transportation like Uber and Lyft. The same applies to our learners as well. On-demand, in-the-moment knowledge is really what fits today's do-it-yourself learner. So YouTube has completely democratized specialized knowledge as we know it. A good example of this is I recently had to replace a faucet in my kitchen. My husband and I go on YouTube, we get everything that we need, and with those sound bites and helpful tips that we find, we can actually do this ourselves. We don't need the specialized training of an expensive plumber, for example. So we're all used to getting training like this in the moment when we need it, and in these soundbite fashions. So just enough training, and it's really about just providing the right training at the right time so that we're preventing that information overload that's so common with maybe traditional longer form training. And this goes for security awareness programs too. Our goal is really to deepen our users' engagement, comprehension, and retention of the security best practices that we're sharing with them. And by doing something like integrating with your endpoint protection, you can actually deliver training at that moment that they need it. So let's put this in perspective a little bit. What you see here is kind of a sample timeline of what may happen in the week of an organization or an individual within that organization. So there are advanced persistent threats, or APTs, that are automated and constantly attacking your networks and your systems. In any given week, your network may experience hundreds or even thousands of malware or phishing or other cyber attacks. And in each of these instances that we see, the endpoint protection system is responsible for not only detecting those attacks, but blocking them from your users. And that's really where the endpoint protection is doing its job. It's detecting those attacks and putting up the necessary roadblocks so we don't need to worry necessarily about the risk to our end users. But we also know that endpoint protection systems aren't 100% foolproof. They do on occasion let something through, and it does get down to the end user. And what we want to ensure is at that moment that we have well-educated users that know how to respond. So we see each of the scenarios where your endpoint protection system is doing its job and successfully blocking these malicious attacks, effectively isolating your users from danger, as teachable moments. So it's an opportunity to deliver just-in-time micro-learning to your employees. So SecurityIQ's new event-activated learning strengthens your defenses by training your users during these blocked attacks so that in the event that one of those attacks does go undetected, they can actually serve as your second line of defense. So we're really all about preparing them to recognize an attack and make the smart decision to either report it or not respond to it. And then lastly, this integration that we have between security awareness training and your endpoint protection systems really allows us to link the latent intelligence that's available from your EPP to your training programs. And it really helps create that continuous learner feedback loop. So block security events will help identify security knowledge gaps among your users, which then in turn facilitates this quick on-demand training. And over time, as you continue closing these knowledge gaps, the cycle results in a more cyber alert and resilient workforce. And that's really what it's all about. So at this time, Jack and Scott will actually demonstrate SecurityIQ's new event-activated learning capability.
So let's see how simple it is to set this up with SecurityIQ. There's just a couple steps that you need to do. And then what we'll do is turn it over to Scott here, one of our engineers that will actually infect a virtual machine with a Trojan, and in that infection process, the endpoint protection will block it, and we will send a training module to the end user, being me in this case, and prevent that from happening. To set up a campaign, first thing we need to do for endpoint protection is to pick which module we wish to send to our users when they do the corresponding event or action that is blocked by endpoint protection. So for example, we could send to our users a module on browser security when they do try to install a hostile browser plugin. We could pick any of these modules that are related to browser security, but the safe web browsing one is a very good module to use in that case. It's also translated into 22 different languages. So if one of your learners is a native speaker of a different language besides English, it would be a good module to send to them when they do fall for that. So once our module is selected, we then go to the next step to setting up the campaign, which is to create the notification. Through our custom notifications feature, we can pick any sort of notification for people that do fall victim to some sort of attack that's blocked by your endpoint protection. So this notification here says, we've detected hostile browser activity and that the user has attempted to run malware on their corporate computer. The notification also tells them you've been enrolled in this module, and we're going to help you learn how to spot malicious files and what to do when you do spot one. We're also going to reinforce this message with a little bit of enforcement action here that says, please complete this training immediately reporting on your progress is going to be sent to management every day. So that's our notification we're going to send out. The final step is just to go ahead and build a campaign. So we give our campaign event activated learning demo. We then go and pick how frequent we would like this campaign to run. This is a little bit more of an advanced feature with campaigns, but essentially it is how often we would like someone to get a notification and get enrolled in a specific module or course that's related to an endpoint protection event activated learning situation. This is the maximum amount of time that someone can be enrolled in for a certain period. So for example, if I schedule this weekly, a person can only be enrolled once per week in this campaign. If I schedule monthly, only once per month and once per quarter. And why this is important is potentially you can have users that will trigger all sorts of EPP events. And when they do so, you may not want to enroll them continuously 3 or 4 times a day or multiple times per week. This then is a limiter on how often this person will get enrolled in this special purpose campaign. So once that's set up, we'll go and take a look at a campaign we have ready here. We have a production campaign up and ready to go. And what I'll do is I will remove myself from the campaign, and we'll see how that when Scott executes malware on a virtual machine with me logged in as it will then re-enroll me back in this campaign and send me a notification. So removing myself from the campaign is an easy task. I just go to the campaign, remove, and now I'm removed. And we will now turn the demo over to Scott, who will show how endpoint integration works and what happens when a user attempts to infect themselves with malware and how it hooks up to SecurityIQ.
So what I'm going to show now is from the standpoint of a user. So I'm going to demonstrate dragging this malware off of this virtual machine onto this Windows computer. This Windows computer is that of a user named Jack. When I do this, the semantic endpoint cloud protection will capture the event, and we'll watch that happen. We can see here that the semantic endpoint protection found that file that was malware and said that it's a security risk and captured it, and then it pushed it to the semantic endpoint protection cloud. This is a tool that we made internally to interact with the Semantic Endpoint Protection Cloud API and the SecurityIQ API. These 4 text boxes are where the API keys go. You get them from Semantic and you get them from your SecurityIQ account. Once you have those keys, the tool is ready to go. The first step is to load your SecurityIQ campaigns. You can see that we've successfully loaded all the campaigns. The next step is to load the semantic events. One thing to note here is that I selected 7 days. That means that we're going to collect 7 days of events from the Semantic Endpoint Protection Cloud. The tool has to use the API over the internet, so this can take several minutes if there's a lot of events. Okay, now that the events have loaded, you can see all the different event types that come from the Semantic Endpoint Protection Cloud. What this tool allows you to do is select specific events here and associate them with specific campaigns in SecurityIQ. We are looking at this campaign here, so we'll select that campaign. One thing you may have noticed is that down here in the custom strings, malware popped up. What this is because I've already configured this tool once, and what that allows the administrator to do is trigger events or trigger education for events in a more general way. So if I were to select an event with the checkbox, this event would get if it had an email associated with it, would enroll the learner in SIQ with the associated email. Now, if this event is less specific or is too specific, I can make that more general by using custom strings. So if I want to catch all events with malware in the string, I can just put malware in the custom strings box, and then that will happen. So multiple users could be enrolled, whoever has events that have malware in them. You can see that we have several events with malware in the string, in the event string. So we'll test this out and see if it works. One thing to keep in mind is that once you set these rules, you can set them for multiple campaigns for multiple reasons. So you can have one for malware, or you can have one for browser plugins, so on. And then you can fully automate this. So after you set your rules, your administrator doesn't have to interact with the tool. They set it up as a scheduled task, and it runs automatically. So we'll try to enroll the learner, and we'll see what happens. So you can see here that because we have several events with malware in them, it's trying to enroll each email with the event that has malware in it. Many of these are, you may have noticed earlier that these learners were already enrolled, so the tool doesn't re-enroll them in the campaign. It just lets you know that they were probably already enrolled. If we scroll up, we can see Jack's name here several times, and that's indicating to us that Jack was enrolled in that campaign. And it's also indicating to us that Jack must have had events with malware several times. All right, I'll turn it back over to Jack so he can show you the enrollment in the campaign and the campaign email.
Here's our campaign. After running that malware on my virtual machine over there, we can now see that the tool ran, as Scott demonstrated. And what should happen now is I should be pushed into this campaign, enrolled as someone who had attempted wholeheartedly to infect myself with malware. And as you can see, I am enrolled. And additionally, I should see my notification message show up in my email, my test email. And you can see here, yes, I have been enrolled in this campaign. And because I am enrolled, I then can go and take my training and learn how not to infect myself in the future. SecurityIQ will now track that I've been delivered this message and that I have begun my journey on becoming a more secure user in the organization. And you can see now that I'm in progress here with this campaign, and I'm on my way to no longer infecting myself.
Okay. All right, so good demo there from Scott and Jack. We appreciate that, their help for getting that for us today. So really interesting stuff there. Looks like we've got a couple of questions rolling in from some folks who are watching with us today. The first one we'll go with here is from Marcus. Can you give an example of how a security event, that event-activated learning, would commonly act on? What kind of events would we be looking at with that?
So that's a good question, because the approach we took here is to be really flexible, and we've used this internally. So an example of how we use this internally is we look for events with malware in the event string. So Symantec has different events, and we get them through the Symantec API, and they come out as strings, and we look for the word malware in strings, and then that indicates that somebody tried to download or run malware on their machine, and then we enroll them in training based on that event. Where the flexibility comes in with our approach is that you can do this based on any event. Phishing, hostile browser add-ons, dangerous attachments, and even further, you could come up with custom events. So if in Symantec, you create a rule that says create a security event if this person does X, Y, or Z, we can trigger on that, and we can even come up with custom trainings based on those events. So it's a really flexible approach that allows you to deliver training based on how you need training in your organization.
Perfect, thank you. We have a question from William. So is Sentinel-1 on the roadmap, or maybe some other endpoint protection systems that we didn't have listed on the previous slide?
So the key to this question is the API. So for any, to integrate with any endpoint protection, you'll need to, the endpoint protection solution will need to have an API. So if Sentinel has an API that allows us to get user information based off events or based off of something else, we can very likely build out a tool. So if this is something that you're watching and you say, wow, I'm really interested in this, but I want it for my specific endpoint protection, I would highly encourage you to reach out to one of our representatives, because it's very likely that if your endpoint protection has an API, we can build you out a tool.
Awesome. Great question from Rebecca to follow up with that. Can she use this tool if she's not familiar with API keys? Kind of how would she go about doing that maybe?
So that's kind of a yes. There's a lot to that. So yes, the basic answer is yes, especially if you're currently using Symantec. We have instructions. But the best part is that if you're an SIQ customer, you have a built-in client success manager that will walk you through setting everything up. And even if you are not a Symantec customer and you want to have a custom one built out, like for Sentinel, your client success manager working through you and for you can help us build out that tool and get it built to specifications where you don't have to be an expert in your endpoint protection API, as long as it meets some basic requirements.
Perfect. One last question we'll follow up with here from Jerry. Do I have to change any settings in the endpoint protection software that I use to integrate event-activated learning?
So you likely don't have to change settings. There's a couple important things to take note of, is that for a person or a learner or a user to be enrolled in a just-in-time campaign or an event-activated learning campaign, they have to have an email associated with them on your endpoint protection, and that's how we enroll them in the SecurityIQ side. So you may want to change settings if you need to add emails, or if you want to make rules to allow for that custom activated learning, then maybe you can change some settings, but it's most likely not required.
Perfect. Well, thank you for answering those questions for us. To wrap up here, we invite you to visit our website, InfoSecInstitute.com, and go ahead and look at the SecurityIQ page and look for the Event Activated Learning tab. We'll send that out in the follow-up email as well, so that you can take a peek at that. I want to thank everyone for joining us today, as well as thank our guests, Kristen, Jack, and Scott, for giving us a great session and a great demo today. Have a great rest of your day, everyone. Thanks for joining.